different people have a,
I just hit the record button if that's okay with you.
no, that's good. Thank you so much. Um, different folks, different companies have different takes on this future of work question. And the most important thing for us to do is figure out what is GitLab's distinct, different take on this, or else we're going to get buried in the noise of this giant topic that many people are talking about. And I know that we have a different take on it. And I think we just want to make sure that we get all the inputs so that we can figure out what that is exactly. That's the most important thing for us to do in this project. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. And I see it as, look, there's a lot of kind of best practices in management that are just make a ton of sense. Every company should do them. That's 80-90% of what a company should do. And there's a 10% extra that a company can do. And that's stuff we figured out because being remote forces you to do the things that you should do anyway, but it forces you to do them. These practices are not specific to working remote, even in an in-office environment, or not even, but in an in-office environment, they work just as well. So we're no longer talking about remote best practices. We're talking about modern company best practices and maybe a bit Gen Z best practices and millennial best practices, where people have a bigger desire for information and want to be able to contribute more. And people are not so much in their cubicle or closed off or working in silos, but it's modern companies need to work across silos even more than before, and work across time zones and work across cultures and everything else.
Yeah, I think that's a good framing, thinking about this in this broader sense of like, well, what is almost like in some ways it's kind of like, what's people's relationship to work going to be, and what's the company's relationship to them going to be, and how's that going to change, and how do you manage in that world, I guess. I have a set of questions I want to ask that I think will help us uncover these things. The questions are tools. If any of the questions aren't useful, we'll move on the discussion. But I would love to hear you talk. And I know that, and I just want to acknowledge this, like, I know that GitLab has, the remote manifesto, has all these kind of pieces of thought leadership and writing around all of this.
If I refer to something, it's not like you should have read this or you should have volunteered it. It's just that I'm proud that we wrote it down.
For sure. That totally makes sense. So I think the first thing, and then also in some ways, I suspect that your thinking about this has evolved over time. So I'm also trying to capture almost like the state of the art of your your thinking about this too. Like, what are we thinking today? So just to jump in, I would love to hear you talk a little bit about like, what are some of the like biggest problems with how work happens today? If we're talking about the future where things are better, what's going on today?
Yeah, as a framework for that, I'll use these. I think that not enough people get to weigh in on a decision, weighing in as in supplying relevant data. Like, decisions happen under the radar, because the more people I get involved, the more people I have to get on the same page. So I'm reluctant to invite people, and therefore I'm not getting the best information. And I'm not getting a diverse enough set of viewpoints. So that's a problem. The second problem is decisions take too long to make, because we want to aim for consensus, because we want to, and it takes time. And decisions take too much time, which reduces the number of decisions we can take in a certain time frame. There's too much work. There's not enough guidance in the beginning of like where we should probably end up. Stuff is left too vague. Click on that. I think I'm repeating a few things from the previous one. decisions have to wait for a meeting. Decisions have to, there's too much process around decisions. I'm doing a bit of both on these. They're closely related. And then last of all, like decisions don't get executed on. Like decisions are made, but the company doesn't completely follow through on them. And the behavior is not changed. How the organization functions is not changed, and they got lost in a telephone game inside the organization.
It's worth noting that it seems to me like all of those problems are pretty close into productivity, effectiveness, impact, the ability of the organization to do what it's supposed to be doing. Do we think it's bigger than that, or is that intentional, that kind of focus on that piece of it, if that makes sense? Because you could imagine there's a lot of people who think about the future work and they're thinking of it from, maybe they're thinking from like employee perspective, or they're thinking of it from, this is very centered in like what the business is trying to achieve. And that could be a difference. I'm curious if you feel like that's centered there intentionally.
I think all the literature shows that the most important thing people want in a job is a sense of progress, a sense that you've achieved something. And so you say productivity, I say a sense of progress. That's what this framework is focused on. And you have leaders of the highest market cap companies saying, look, a lot of our people are just not getting much done. It's not because they hired bad people. It's because they aren't embracing MECC.
So in some ways, this kind of next question, like, who does this affect? And is that who we're talking to? Those are kind of, it's separate, two questions. It sounds like some of what you're talking about, well, it affects the employees.
Employees and organizations. And we're talking to all industries, both for-profit and not-for-profit, government entities as well. We're talking to people who want faster progress inside their company or inside their job.
So if we can't solve the problems you're talking about, what goes wrong? What are the ramifications of not being able to solve this set of problems?
Yeah, as an employee or team member, we call them at GItlab, you don't have satisfaction in your job. You don't think you made a difference. You're not able to bring your viewpoint to decisions where it might have mattered. You're not able to get a decision so you can move on with your life. The company's not responding fast enough and changing fast enough, and things are not changing. Like there were decisions made, but they didn't get done, and failures of other to execute on things they should have is affecting your day to day.
That's really those are ramifications for the team member. What happens if we zoom up to the company and even a level above that?
The company gets stale. It gets what Amazon calls day two. Like it moves too slowly. It gets disrupted. It becomes no longer a pleasant place to work. The turnover increases. Good ambitious people leave. It becomes a rest and vest place. Profits go down, growth goes down, ambition levels go down.
And then maybe like we're just going to play this game all the way out. Like, and then if we zoom out to the level of society and our
The
companies
universe. Oh,
stall
sorry.
out,
Okay, so sorry.
we'll stay one level. We'll stay just on. We'll stay on the planet. We'll stay on
Yeah.
stay on planet Earth. Yeah.
Look, we got big problems ahead of us as a world, and no one wants to. Very few people are ready to go down in their lifestyle in order to address climate change, to make even more progress on solving extreme poverty. So all of that has to come from more productivity. Like we want more free time. We don't want the climate to change too much. We want to have it solve even more of poverty. All those, we want even better healthcare for everyone. Like all those things have to come out of productivity growth.
Kind of taking a step back for a moment, because I want to get past the obvious answer here, but it's like, what are the things that are changing about the world that actually open up new possibilities for the future of work? And I know we can obviously say like, well, COVID kind of rushed everybody into remote work, everybody else, not y'all. But what else? What other forces are kind of making this almost like something in play again?
The digitalization, like the digital tools available to us, not just the Zoom that enables the remote work, but the Google Doc where everyone can type in and everyone can see what someone is doing. I think the rate of change is accelerating in the world. So organizations almost have to respond faster. Automation is causing the most relevant jobs to be almost more creative. It's like creating software. That might not be your definition of creative, but it is mine. And we call them literally creators on TikTok, Instagram, and LinkedIn nowadays. So these jobs require higher creativity. They require more decisions because it's a creative work, and they require more multidisciplinary work.
So so I'm going to restate that idea. It's almost like the kinds of jobs that are going to create value in the future demand a different way of working.
Exactly. So in the past, you were maybe executing according to a process. Today, we can, if it's always the same, we can just automate it. We have just robotic process automation. So those jobs where the work was the same are disappearing. So for the new jobs, the work is constantly changing. That means you constantly have to align with everybody else, which means you need to take many more decisions that span multiple people.
This question's a little bit more almost like going back a bit. Sometimes these things come out of like this, and maybe this question is a tiny bit more aimed at Sid the person, I guess. As opposed to like talking as GitLab. I'm curious, like when did these ideas about the future of work start to form? When did you realize that this was an important thing to think about and care about for you? And what were some of the like initial insights you had about it?
We assumed that remote work was very hard because it was hard for us to do it, and very few companies did it. And then COVID hit, and it turned out every organization was able to go remote. So many parts of it were relatively easy, but they did remote, but they were missing a ton of what we were doing. And people assumed it was in the tools or the tool use or the agenda formats or something like that. But it wasn't. It wasn't these practices that we're describing with MECC. And we kind of felt like they were kind of missing out. And also we were growing as an organization at GitLab, and we had to explain. People came in and like, I already know remote. So they weren't open to like, hey, learning as much because like, I already know how to work remotely. So we figured out it wasn't about working remotely. We just had a whole bunch of practices that weren't specific to remote, that were that you could also do in a co-located organization, but they were kind of new things, and probably elements are practiced all around the world, but we wanted to articulate clearly what that extra thing was that makes us more productive and have a bit more of a sense of progress.
Was there, out of curiosity, was there any like almost like moments of frustration or moments of pain where you realized that GitLab was going to have to lead here, was going to have to solve this problem? Was there anything that sparked that? Yeah.
I think I've seen a lot of organizations I work with in the past go one of two routes. Either they became kind of a consensus culture where everyone did weigh in on decisions, but it took way too long and they didn't move fast enough. Or they became very hierarchical where no one got to weigh in on decisions. They were taken fast, but they were frequently missing relevant context. And I've always felt like, look, you don't need to pick one or two. Like, just have everyone weigh in on the decision and then have one person make it, and everyone should get over themselves and let that person make it. And yeah, they're not always going to pick what you suggested, but it doesn't mean the person has to come back to you and convince you. It's their decision, not yours. You contributed something. You can assume they read it. Let them make the decision.
It's kind of interesting because a lot of what you're talking about is actually about how team members relate to each other. And that's not really like a tools problem, you know, that's kind of like a human relationships kind of problem. Am I making that up, or is that?
No,
yeah.
I think there's an organization I was a part of, and you support each other as kind of management people, and every meeting begins with people talking about something that they are experiencing in their life right now, and then people can chime in and share their stories, but they cannot give advice, because they found that if people give advice and the next meeting they still have the same problem and they still haven't followed your advice, people get frustrated with each other. And I think that's one of the breakthrough things you can have in business. If you're able to give advice, but then take your ego out of it if people don't follow that. And that's hard. I told someone today, look, it's the second time I'm mentioning it. Like, I got frustrated that they didn't follow up the first time. So it's hard. But it's very necessary. If we're gonna have a lot of people chime in on something, there's not gonna be this ego preserving thing where they come back to you and say, oh, so nice that you did that, and I'm thinking this, and what do you think? It hinders progress, and it causes the reverse, where you don't even find out a decision is being made, and it prevents you from chiming in on things you really should have been given the opportunity to chime in on.
Right, people start to sort of squirrel their work away and hide things to not have to deal with that.
Yep.
Okay, so now talking about this workplace OS idea, I know that it's being defined, I know that it's emerging, but like, if you kind of had to fast forward to the future a little bit and say, and look, you know, you went to the URL and the thing existed, what do you see there? What is what kind of a place is it? What kind of a product is it?
Yeah, I think I Googled Six Sigma yesterday, a popular management practice from the 80s. And if you Google that, you find training courses, you find certifications. I hope you find a conference, an upcoming conference, local meetups, a job board. Those are the things I hope you'll find.
So what I'm hearing is bigger than content, bigger than, you know, lists of best practices, sort of like active community events, you know, Slack channel, or, you know, something like that. Not Slack channel, but
Discord. whatever,
Yeah.
LinkedIn, the LinkedIn equivalent of those.
Yeah. And then I guess like what are the I don't know, like what might the obviously like one of the big pillars that you've been talking about is just this idea of like, okay, how do we make a place where everyone can contribute? That feels like a pillar of this thing. Are there any other like foundational ideas that are, that are like kind of keep that sort of keep coming back up in this place?
It's not as foundational as you're looking for, but one thing that keeps coming up is like, make a proposal, empowering people to feel okay with an initial version, so that we have a proposal out there and we can maybe ship that or build on that or critique that. But a lot of time is being lost in organizations where like they spend 3 months and only 80% of the time in, there's the first proper thing to review and critique. And it might be, it greatly limits the flexibility you have to build something better together.
Yeah, you're talking about iteration, I guess. That's how I would frame that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a little bit of like, how do people work together? Then how should the individual contribute in that? Those are kind of two different, related but different things. So then, and I want to, I don't want to overstate this, but I do think it's the most important context for this is obviously this is almost like this is a bit of a race. This notion of like, we have to define the future of work, and that Microsoft has an agenda, Apple has all these different companies have an agenda in defining this. And so that means they're motivated to invest in this. And that means there's a lot of people trying to lead the way here. So how, and I've asked this before, but I'm asking it again. If you imagine that landscape, if you imagine a world where a bunch of tech-driven companies and other companies have a take on the future of work, how is GitLab's different? Like, what's like the one thing that makes it really distinct from everybody else's take on this?
Yeah, we didn't start this as a response to anything. We started it because we felt it was missing. And I think what's different is that, I think what's really different, if you look at our practices, we link to an example where we actually practiced it. I think a lot of other work practices are pretty vague. And I think that our transparency enables us to actually share examples and to have something real behind it instead of wishful thinking.
Yeah, so one thing I might take away from that is, there's potentially like less sort of like philosophy, even thought leadership, and there's more practical, there's more practical like how-tos and frameworks and lists, and it just is literally it's more concrete because you have more direct experience with it.
Yeah, hopefully not at the expense of thought leadership, but hopefully we can make it really actionable.
Okay, yeah, that's very useful. That makes sense, and does build on something that is just true about you. So I'm happy to hear that answer. Okay, so then what's the relationship to the product? Like what is the relationship to like the One DevOps platform? What do you think the relationship to that is? How does that inform this?
Yeah, so on one hand, like all these practices, they don't depend on a certain tool or anything else. They supersede, they should be not be dependent on GitLab as a company or GitLab as a product. If I look at our product is a DevOps platform, informed decisions, like raising the visibility of everything, allowing people to chime in. And then fast decisions, like GitLab allows you to measure that. GitLab allows you to be really intentional about like who approves and who's just giving suggestions. It's about many decisions. It allows you to kind of work on many things in parallel, to work async, to not need the meeting to get the status overview. And if you look at executing on decisions, there's a lot of tooling, like what have we done, and also data about like how is it affecting our users and customers. So a lot of these practices are also about like reducing faster cycle time, like go faster. Because if you are able to go faster, you can split things up, make many more decisions, get faster feedback, and that feedback is information that feeds into it. So that's what GitLab as a DevOps platform do: reduce cycle time by not having to jump between 10 different apps to get something done.
Do you imagine a scenario where like in the product roadmap, I don't know, like practices and ways of working that are introduced here somehow become like templates for doing things? You know, it's almost like a very direct connection to the product itself. Like, oh, and here's a template for doing that.
Yeah, I could see that. And if you look at GitLab today, it already has value stream mapping, which gets pretty close to some of these things.
Okay.
Or it's value stream management, and
value stream management.
You're able to see kind of the speed of decisions, the cycle time, how many you're able to execute on, identifying constraints, removing bottlenecks, optimizing flow.
Okay, so if it's 5 years from now, and this set of the workplace, let's shoot whatever it ends up being called, but this workplace OS has an impact. You know, it's one of like the 5 big ways that people think about think about the future of work, or maybe at that point it's just work. How is the world different? Like, what's the best possible scenario, like for change, for positive change?
Yeah, so when we hire someone and we tell them about all these things, they're like, yeah, duh, already know that. Of course, everyone does that. It's like it becomes so boring that you don't even think about it anymore. Like, I don't know, OKRs are today, or many of the lessons in high output management are today. It's just standard business practices.
And yeah, and I guess and maybe just to extrapolate for a moment, just if these ideas are pretty somewhat, like, if I was to reflect back to what you just said, it's something the effect of like, well, these ideas will be widely accepted and will be almost taken for granted. And what's the impact of that? Like, what happens outside of what if those ideas are widely accepted? How is work different? How is
And work, people have more of a sense of progress. There's more productivity that gives us the room to solve big problems. And work is only going to keep getting more complex. So there will be new practices that are needed at that time that build on top of the foundation that's already there. And hopefully also, like, companies make better decisions. People have more flexible work days. It's easier to collaborate across time zones, things like that.
Great. This is not the most important question to answer here, but I didn't want to leave it on. I didn't want to not bring it into it. So if the world changes that way, like who is like challenged by that change? Like what, it seems like, yeah.
So information hoarders, companies who choose left or right, the companies that are super hierarchical, don't allow anybody to chime in on a decision. Companies that are super consensus and take forever to get to a decision. companies where you were able to have a lot of blah blah about all your plans and then never had to follow up on executing on them. But now there's accountability. Managers who were not adding a ton of value. I strongly believe in the value of middle management, but a lot of that is in like career planning for your reports, for making sure you reach out to peers to fix cross-functional problems. It's not about having grandiose plans without and then getting away with not executing on them.
Yeah, in some ways, it's like the proof will be in the producing. It's kind of like if you're making stuff, and it's working, it'll be more obvious. One of the things I was thinking,
hopefully, like one of the things is it's about the output. So hopefully, it's less about the input. And one of the most common examples is the CEO in Silicon Valley who watches the car park on how busy it is at the office, or Japanese so-called salaryman culture. Those are the cultures that should be challenged.
Yeah, it also seems like there's a lot of workplace cultures where people who win in those cultures depend on sort of like information asymmetry, like other people don't know what they're up to, but they're good at looking busy. Other people don't know how they're treating the people who report to them. But yeah, there's something, some of what you're getting at, it's almost just like, it's like a more pure, seamless, sorry, I'm trying to process too early.
There's more transparency around who provided input, who made a decision, who's accountable for it, who's getting the results. And all those things are things that some people, like, they did not provide a ton of input. They did not risk a lot by actually making the decision, and the result wasn't there. Like, all these things are things that people will get away with, and it's not going to this is not 100% solved for that, but it should diminish that.
The last thing I want to reflect back to you and have you confirm or not confirm is, it does seem like baked into all of this is a fairly optimistic view of like people, of humanity, of the team member, and yeah, do you think that's versus like trying to kind of like command and control or make sure that manage the risk of people making the kinds of mistakes that people make? Am I making that up, or do you think that's baked into this?
Well, a few things. First of all, optimistic is realistic. Most people are good, and most people in an organization have the best intentions. Younger generations are even more talented. So I don't think that's weird to assume that. I don't think that we're giving anything up on accountability. At GitLab, we say, look, we trust the good intent of people, but you don't have to assume that things get done. You measure it. There's no alternative to that. So this is not some kumbaya theory of management.
Great. Those are the questions I had for you today. Is there anything, knowing that we're working on this, is there anything you want to tell us that you didn't get the chance to express while we've been talking that I didn't ask you?
Well, first of all, these were great questions, and I think we talked about a lot that hasn't been said yet. So thank you for that. The second, it would be great if this transcends GitLab. So we're going to try to find other companies who are willing to adhere to the same framework and incorporate their feedback on it.
Great, that makes sense. Okay, well, that's what I wanted to ask you about. So thank you, and I hope you have a good day. And I'll have